President Xi Jinping has met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. It marks his first visit since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Xi said his country was ready to stand guard over the world order and praised his relationship with the Russian president, calling him a dear friend.
For his take on this, the Professor of International Politics, Scott Lucas. Scott, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eamon and Isabel.
Well, what did you make of this meeting, this love-in between the two superpowers?
Lots of pomp, lots of ceremony. Now let's see the substance. And by that, I mean, you'd be very surprised if Xi had said that Vladimir Putin was a horrible, terrible man when he's being received in Moscow. And you certainly would be surprised if Vladimir Putin, whose military is in trouble in eastern Ukraine, are on their last gasp offensive, who desperately needs a friend, had said anything mean about Xi. When I say that we need to see the substance, China has given economic support to Russia by buying its oil and gas very cheaply and by expanding trade relations. China has given some political support to Russia by not even calling this a war. However, China has not crossed the red line of providing military support to bail Putin out as he runs into trouble over the failing invasion. And China has also distanced itself diplomatically. It's actually said in this 12-point plan that it's put forward, look, we need to respect the sovereignty of all countries, which means not just Russian sovereignty, Ukrainian sovereignty. In other words, China's main interest in this visit is not to help Vladimir Putin out, it's to defend Beijing's interests, which are to look like the big diplomatic superpower that can resolve this conflict and to make a bit of money out of the conflict that's killed so many people, if it can.
Somebody shaking the hands of a man who's just been indicted by the International Criminal Court is certainly something to behold, in a historic picture and summit yesterday. But that 12-point plan you're describing, China trying to call it some sort of peace plan, the Americans saying do not be fooled, but we can't underestimate their track record on this, recently brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They could do the same, a planned call with Zelensky after his visit to Moscow from President Xi Jinping.
And I think you've really identified Beijing's tactics here. The difficulty for them to follow up the Saudi and Iran plan is that Saudi and Iran wanted to restore diplomatic relations for various reasons. They each needed to do so. Here, and we have to be honest, there's one man who stands in the way of any negotiations that are significant, and that's Vladimir Putin, because there will not be significant negotiations on ending this conflict, or at least getting a ceasefire, unless Russia agrees to withdraw from territory that it has seized since February 2022. And there's no sign that Vladimir Putin is going to withdraw from that occupied territory. Indeed, he keeps throwing more and more men to the front in sort of this desperate attempt to grab a little bit more territory in eastern Ukraine while he still can.
Russia has fallen out with the West. Naturally, it's turned to the east, and we're concentrating on China. But it's not just China who could be a possible friend or an actual friend to Russia. India must play a big role in all of this.
Not just India, but also Japan. And there's a connection here to look at, because this morning, it's not just Xi who's making a visit. The Japanese Prime Minister Kishida is in Kyiv talking to Vladimir Zelensky. Now, that's a clear sign of Japan saying, we back Ukraine's defense. It's the first visit by a Japanese prime minister since 1945 to a country which is at war. Now, how does India fit into this? Before he went to Kyiv, where was Japanese Prime Minister Kishida? Meeting the Indian leader, Narendra Modi, in India, because India has, of course, benefited as well from taking this Russian oil and gas, but it's very firmly sat on the fence. It won't call this an invasion. On the other hand, it will not give too much support to the Russians. And the Japanese goal, as well as the Americans and the Australians, who are in the Quad, this four-nation pact in Asia, is to make sure that India continues to sit on that fence and doesn't try to bail out Mr. Putin either.
And Professor, finally, I don't know if you've seen some of the images doing the round, some of Putin parading through Mariupol or wherever it might be in occupied Ukraine. Lots of suggestions that he's got body doubles and lots of different versions of Putin seen out and about. I mean, do you believe any of that, or do you think that we're really seeing Putin, and a man that we know to be deeply fearful and paranoid at the moment?
No, I think that's a distraction to talk about doubles because Vladimir Putin was in Crimea just before this. And of course, Russia seized Crimea in 2014. It was the ninth anniversary of that seizure that he was marking. And so, it's plausible that he went into Mariupol, this city that the Russians just destroyed last spring. Why? To proclaim, I'm still in charge. Look, we still have a victory. Here's the real story out of Mariupol. When you see those images you're looking at right now, they are very carefully stage managed. Putin met a very small group of people who were claimed to be residents. And while he was doing so, if you listen very carefully and know a bit of Russian, you can hear someone shouting in the background, don't believe this. This is all fake. In other words, Vladimir Putin, who also faces infighting in Moscow between the Russian Defense Ministry and the Wagner Group mercenaries, well, he wanted to say, look, I'm not losing this. Look, I can still win. Look, here I am. Whether that PR appearance in Mariupol has any substance, of course, will depend on what happens in the battlefield and significantly on how much military aid Ukraine gets in forthcoming months from its international partners.